I'll make a start. I think some people are still joining in, but I will make a start. So my name is Maria Rovisco. I'm Associate Professor in Sociology in the School of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Leeds. And I have been working with Ambrose for quite a few years in this grassroots festival, which is the Leicester Human Rights Art and Film Festival. Last year with the pandemic, we moved a lot of the sessions online, and we are still trying to keep the festival going. And this year has a hybrid format, so some of the sessions are in person, some are online. The session I have organized this year is on arts, activism and human rights, which is a topic which is very close to my own research interests. And this is a session that we are organizing as part of the 8th annual Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival. So this is the 8th year the festival is running. The theme that I asked the panelists, which I'll be introducing very shortly, to respond to is how arts activism can contribute to bringing about meaningful social and political change. So it's to reflect about the relationship between arts activism, but also to interrogate what is arts activism and see how the arts can contribute to meaningful social and political change. The environmental crisis, inequality, anti-trans discrimination and racism are some of the most pressing issues of our times. And the panelists we invited today are people, researchers and activists and artists who we felt could speak to these themes. Unfortunately, one of the panelists, Ruth Pierce, she's not able to be here today because she's poorly with COVID. She's very sorry. She thought she may be able to join because it's online, but she's unwell, so she can't be here today. So we are just going ahead with Paula and Patricia Francis, which I'll be introducing more fully in a couple of minutes. And some of the questions I would like us to reflect today and pick up possibly during the Q&A are the following. Can artists credibly claim to engage with these such pressing issues I've just mentioned? And when does art become a form of activism? Because obviously many artists might be interested in intervening in the world, but what they do cannot be considered or might not be considered a form of activism. So when does art become a form of activism? And why might we need arts activism? So these are some of the questions I hope we can pick up more generally, but also obviously there will be questions that will arise from the work of Paula and Patricia. So now I'm going to introduce the speakers. So Patricia Francis is a filmmaker and doctoral researcher at Nottingham Trent University, whose research analyzes dissenting female voices using documentary film directorial practice. Patricia will be also talking about her Arts Council funded film, The Art of Oppression, which was made during the pandemic. The other speaker is Dr. Paula McCloskey. She's an artist and researcher at the University of Derby, who will talk about her art and spatial research practice, A Place of Their Own, and the entanglements of geopolitics, art, and the climate crisis. Paula's work includes the short film, The Territories of Ailey. I hope I pronounced this well, Paula Ailey. Which is work developed with A Place of Their Own, and I'm sure Paula will explain in more detail, what this project is about and who is A Place of Their Own. I'll leave it up to her. Unfortunately, Ruth Pierce cannot be here, but Dr. Ruth Pierce is a lecturer at the University of Glasgow, and she was going to speak about how trans activism has mobilized visual and artistic resources to bring about social and political change. So Ruth used to be my colleague at the University of Leeds. She's a fabulous researcher. She's actually not an artist, but she plays in a band, and she would have a lot to say about this theme. So it's a shame we can't hear about this specific issue of trans activism. But with no further ado, I would like to invite Patricia to talk to do our presentation and their contribution, then Paula, and then we'll have a Q&A, around 30 minutes for the Q&A.
Okay, great. So I think what I want to do first is just try to share. Do I want to do that? Let me just have a quick look. Okay. I will want to share, but I won't share just yet. Okay, so thank you, and thank you to the team for asking me to participate. I'm really pleased to be part of the festival. So before I start, yes, I do want to do that. Before I start, what I do want to do is to copy into the chat a link to the film. So this is going to everyone. Doesn't seem to want me to copy it. Now, why would that be? Sorry, let me just try again. Otherwise, I'm trying to copy the link into the chat. Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you. So, yeah, so that's the link to the film. So could you copy and paste that into your browser? Because what we'll be doing is just having quick looks at small sections of the film throughout this talk. So if you're able to copy and paste that into your browser, that'd be really useful. And then while you're doing that, I mean, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the film. If you did, the talk might make more sense, but if you didn't, don't worry, that's not a problem. So today I'll be talking about The Art of Oppression, the film. I've titled today's talk, Visualizing the Muted Effect of Dissenting Women's Voices. And the talk is actually an adaptation of a talk that I gave to a gender research group earlier this year. Okay, so over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll provide some context as to the reason I wanted to make the film. I'll show extracts from it and consider art as a means of protest. Okay, so The Art of Oppression was conceived quite a while before lockdown and features 3 women artists and is a film about art that is made from an understanding of existing within a marginalized group, of being given a label, and of the social and political consequences of that labeling. So as a filmmaker, my works are usually motivated by social issues, and I was keen to make a film about women artists whose motivation was to use their art as a means of conversation, activism, and possibly political change. So The Art of Oppression is also about voice, where voice is both the oral and the physical representation of the women and their activism. It's not just what they say, it is also the social and political space they claim with their art within a patriarchal, capitalist and neoliberal system. Voice is important in The Art of Oppression. I wanted to bring together voices that we seldom hear from or see sharing the filmic space. These are women from different cultures, and although their experiences of marginalization take different forms, the impact on their lived experience is very similar and just as impactful. It was important that the artists were not perceived as celebrities, but were ordinary people who dare to speak out. The act of speaking out is, for women, an act of rebellion in a climate where online harassment against women is, as described by The Guardian, flourishing. But women are not trespassing when they go onto these online sites. They have an equal right to be there and to be heard. In her book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, Rennie Edo-Lodge asserts there is such stigma attached to speaking up and being a woman, let alone speaking up, being a woman and being Black. The repercussions when women attempt to occupy a social or political space can leave them feeling vulnerable, fearful, and unprotected. Attempts were made to mute Darnella Fraser's voice, the teenager who documented the last few moments of George Floyd's life on her iPhone. An unblurring was occurring as the reality of the Black lived experience was too blatant to ignore, and white and Black voices were joined in protest. Indeed, another result of Derek Chauvin's atrocious act was that Darnella's footage provoked worldwide anger that traversed cultures as Black and white people stood side by side in the path of tear gas and as police cars were being driven into them. Black Lives Matter was no longer an appeal, but a demand for social justice with heightened intention. This young Black woman who defied orders to stop filming the policeman's actions had to defend her own voice from an onslaught of others suggesting she should have confronted the officers rather than filmed them, when she was not the only witness to that crime. As women judiciously and consciously modulate their voices in an effort to navigate social systems that endeavor to mute them, they continue to strive to be heard. The artists in the art of oppression are women who dare to speak out, who dare to act knowing there is very real potential of being harassed or abused. These women do not enjoy the protection that celebrity can bring, yet are resolute in their need to vocalize the injustices they encounter. They will not be silenced. Okay, so if I could ask you just to go to the film now, and then go in at from time 6 minutes 13, and then come out at 7 minutes 31. So it's my emotions are truly relevant. So if you can go in at 6 minutes 13. Okay, I'm presuming we're all back. There is a need in these women to speak out, and they articulate their emotions through their art. In When I Dare to Be Powerful, Audre Lorde asked, "What are the words you dare not have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence?" I wonder how many of us have words we need to say but remain silent. I was interested in how challenge is made and meaning created through art, and what motivated that challenge, and working with the three women helped in that understanding. There was a lot I needed to say. I believe that there is now sufficient evidence that my Black female self generally has no perceived social or political value in Western society. The killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor and others, the hounding of Meghan Markle, the abuse that Diane Abbott has to manage, and the disrespect shown to the bodies of sisters Nicole Smallman and Bibba Henry offer examples of my meagre worth. I am outraged that systemic racism, institutionalized racism, social injustice does not appear to be shifting for racialized or marginalized groups in any significant way. The disparities in relation to housing, employment and health for marginalized groups remain. My films enable me to voice that emotion as I attempt, in the case of The Art of Oppression, to represent and represent women and their truths. The Art of Oppression offered me a means of articulating and enduring injustice with the hope that those occupying privileged positions might pause, reflect, not retreat into immediate defense, but instead consider their own actions or inactions that contributes to the inequity and make their change. The Art of Oppression took about 3 years to make. After a conversation with Ivana, one of the artists, and hearing about her story as a teenager growing up during the Yugoslavian Civil War, the impact it had on her, and then seeing her art, I knew there was a story to tell about homeland and racism from a perspective that we're not overly familiar with. It was important that I told about the British Asian and the British Caribbean female experiences. Fazana was chosen after I saw her perform at a pit poetry event that I attended in a North Nottinghamshire village. One poem in particular that she recited spoke of her response to the pomp and ceremony that occurred at an event she was at. Honey is a visual artist. I met at an event, and after speaking with her, researching her work and her motivation as an artist, I made contact with her. It was also important to me that the art we see being created in this film was diverse. I enjoy art and in determining my own meaning from it, and I wanted the film to offer that. What the film also offers is the opportunity to witness the process of creation and to understand the emotion and the motivation that leads to a finished piece. I also hope I've been able to show that the creative process is not always an easy one, in this case made more difficult by only giving the artist 3 weeks to both conceive of an idea and then to create it. I believe art should be accessible to all, and I hope I make that statement particularly at the end of the film in the space chosen for the reveal. Beautiful art does not have to only be situated in pristine, expensive buildings that a select few frequent. So what about my role as a Black female British filmmaker, and where does my own voice fit at the intersection of social injustice, womanhood, and art? I've asked myself the same question. Where does the voice of a Black female director sit? Should her voice be heard, or should she mute herself in the way that the industry has successfully succeeded in doing? Directors UK report revealed that despite the fact that 14% of the UK population consists of people from ethnic minority backgrounds, only 2.2% of our TV programmes are made by directors of colour. Similarly, the 2019 Calling the Shots report findings suggested that around 90% of UK qualifying films have no BAME women. I believe that inserting myself into the film might distract from the women and their truths. Similarly, to exclude myself would be to silence this Black female director. That was my dilemma. What would you do? I consider my films to be works of activism. I attempt to use them to provoke thought and to challenge. So I'll just show some images, so I'll see if I'm actually able to share. So just bear with me. Here we go. So hopefully you can see that. Let me play from current slide. Right, so let me see if I can, because I also need, yeah, that's great. Okay, so I use the filmic space differently. This is in part because whilst the women share many similarities in their lived experiences, whoops, sorry, that's throwing me out. So I'm trying to share my screen with this. It's not working. I don't think I'm able to. I'll do it separately. I wanted to also ensure that their voices and their stories remain distinct, separate, and equally valuable. The final triptych of the clay being flattened and thinned with the rolling pin, similar to rolling flour. There is also an image of Honey with her paintbrushes. They also look like makeup brushes. So those shots for me summarize the intersection of womanhood, social injustice, and art. So what I'll do is I'll just go through them because I'm not. So this is the final image that I was talking about as she's rolling the clay. It's very similar to rolling flour. And here Honey is drawing and she's got her brushes, which again, you know, someone might consider might be makeup brushes. Okay, so let me stop sharing. That's moving around for some reason. Right, of course, the women's experiences overlap, and I attempt to use the space to show that too. In creating this, I was mindful that this may feel like a disruption to the viewing experience and hope that it wouldn't distract from engagement with the women or what they had to say. So if I play the first opening minutes of the film, so if you can play from the start and to 3 minutes 39, that's when I noticed that I was different. I think that was the first time. So if you can go to the film again, please, from the beginning and out at 3 minutes 39. Thank you. Okay, I presume we're all back. So I made the decision at the start of the production process that the women's faces would not be shown during the first part of the film. In fact, their faces are revealed over halfway through the film. Why did I make that decision? I wanted to give the women and their stories primacy, for the audience to focus on what was being said, the stories and the emotions, and to not be distracted by conscious or unconscious stereotyping or bias. If they couldn't see the women, it would be more difficult to form impressions of them. I also made the decision to include myself in the film without distracting from the women and their stories. As a Black British female filmmaker, I am underrepresented in the industry. It therefore seemed wrong for me to continue the process of marginalisation. At the start of the film, you hear Ivana hammering and referencing me by name. This enabled me to both include her voice and to give myself presence in the film. By including this section where Ivana speaks to me as well as across me, I'm present while still giving her agency and position. And I should say that that wasn't set up, that was actually how it happened. Similarly, there are sections in the film where the artists are speaking to someone, and conventional framing would position the interviewer closer to the camera so that it looks as though they're speaking to the viewer. However, I'm positioned away from the camera as they respond to my questions, which gives a sense of another person being present in the room. So I disrupt the viewer's expectation, and I hope I create a conscious or subconscious acknowledgement of a third person, the artist, you, the viewer, and the person the interview is speaking directly to, which is me. Not showing the artists' faces was one of the early decisions I made, and I realized that if I didn't show their faces, I would need to offer an alternative visual experience. I also knew that I wanted to show the three women in one filmic space to identify their differences while simultaneously bringing their shared experiences together. And triptych was the ideal tool for framing women whilst also allowing space for their individual voices to be heard. I was clear that I wanted to show how art can speak to us all, to show the women using their art as a means of dissent and of activism. I also had a sense of the pace and level of noise that I wanted this film to have, despite it being about activism and from a place of frustration and provocation. I wanted the film to have a certain quiet about it. I'm inspired by Tina M. Camp, who wrote in Listening to Images, quiet registers sonically as a level of intensity that requires focused attention. I was keen to encourage a level of intensity and employed the methods you see in my attempt to achieve that focused attention on the women and what they were saying and how they were feeling their emotion, and how they were using their art to articulate that. At the intersection of art, social injustice, and womanhood, Ivana's presence in the film also offers a description of the complexity of racism. Her dual heritage proves divisive to her young teenage self, who fears having to decide between her mother or her father during I'm not quite sure. So one is Croatian, the other is Serbian. Here in the UK, the racism she endures as a white Eastern European woman is damaging. The two non-white artists understand her lived experience. The emotion they feel is raw. As director and practice-based researcher, I was clear that I wanted to show how art can speak to us all and to show the women using their art as a means of dissent and of activism. So the final clip I want to show you, I think demonstrates this. This quiet, despite the frustration and resentment that is felt. So this is the final clip. If you can go to 12 minutes 28, so that's 12 minutes 28, and then the out is at 17:44, and the out is, I don't think you can live like that. So if you go in at 12 minutes 28, thank you. Okay, I presume we're all back. So just to finish then, the art of oppression is an exploration of how to visualize an alternative on-screen space as a site for viewers to listen closely to women who voice resistance and call for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. That was wonderful. I would like now to ask Paula to start her presentation, and then later on we'll have time for questions.
I think you're still on mute, Paula.
Paula, we can't hear you, just in case.
Right, is that better?
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful.
We can hear you.
Yeah, that's okay. Hi everyone again. From me. Thanks Maria for inviting me, and thank you Patricia, that was wonderful. I'm really looking forward to talking further after with everyone. So I'm going to talk about my art and spatial practice, A Place of Their Own, and I'm just going to talk through a few projects, and which I think will help with some of the discussion around this relationship between art and activism, or art activism and art really that isn't is a form that where it intersects with more direct activism, and what and thinking about what art can do differently than direct action. And I think that's some of my experiences might help, and it's something that I think about a lot, and also about, you know, the relationship between art and activism and our everyday and how we live. So I think these questions are really prescient. So yeah, so I'm an artist and a researcher, and I see it as both of those things. So the practice is it's practice-led research that I do, but it's I guess all I do is really entangled with my everyday life as well. So I think that's another kind of theme of the work. So A Place of Their Own started 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And like I said, it's an art and spatial practice. I haven't got Sam's name on this, but I started it with Sam Vardy, who's an architect and spatial practitioner. And we started it 10 years ago with our 4 children as a way to both continue, but look at the kind of relationship between art and spatial research practice, and exploring the meeting between art and the spatial, which Jane Rendell talks about. And rather than seeing research or inquiry and reflection as sort of distinct from practice, we see these as happening at the same time, and we'll come back to that. And it was also importantly at that time, Sam and I had, I mean, I've always been worked before I became an artist. I worked in social care and community work and did a lot of activism, direct activism. And then just over 10 years ago, when I was having young children around me, and I was doing a PhD research myself, there was this time where my world, as it does, kind of contracted. So it's really contextual, and I was really thinking about, Sam and I were thinking about how do we engage with some of the things that we're concerned about. And for us, it was obviously like family and friends and community, but also the kind of connection between those and these global markers of our time. So capitalism, colonialism, and you know, continuing war and all these other questions that we were trying to grapple with while being very much located in the home, and for me particularly having young children. And we wanted to sort of see if there's any radical potential of the heteronormative family. And we wanted to build on some practices that we knew, feminist practices and other practices, about the place of the home as a place where art and activism can happen. And which kind of spoke to both our the spatial elements as well of what we do. And I guess this has continued really, and over the last 10 years we've seen so much that has changed and has happened. And you know, we are now in a time where the world as we know it, like Denise Ferreira da Silva talks about, the end of the world as we know it is no longer unimaginable. So are some of the things that Patricia is talking about, so the pandemic and mass unemployment, climate crisis, border crises, and so on. And it feels that this kind of constant state of crisis. And I think what motivates us with A Place of Their Own as it's continued, as we've seen from the previous, early on, especially, we worked a lot with our children to make work. And what motivates us is to think about what it means to be an artist now. You know, what are our responsibilities, or what Donna Haraway and others have spoke about, what are our responsibilities? How do we respond to, and what? And I talk a lot to, like, now with teaching art students about, you know, trying to think about what does it mean to practice now? How can we practice now? And so this idea of the responsibility is really present in the work. And I guess what A Place of Their Own does, and this was part of COP21, where it was part of what was called a family activist network with the performers, artists from across the UK, and we were all working with our young children in this one here. This is about thinking about our relationships to kind of environmental and climate issues that we were thinking around, and about the ethics of having children, and doing this work. And we did a performance piece with our children. And we would do these kind of small acts that we could do with the children, these small interactions in the public realm, to explore some of these issues with them, and to think about the kind of relation between the different generations, and how our different bodies, how they were differently placed within this kind of in the family, in the home. So this is one of those where we slow travelled as part of the Climate Games, which was a protest at COP21 in Paris. And it was as well as our family, there were 8 other families who we wrote letters to each other over the year coming up to COP21, talking about what it means to have young children, and in the time of climate crises, and about how that affected our practices and our activism. And then we slow travelled over to Paris. Some of us didn't, because obviously, if you remember, it was 2015, there was the bombing in Paris. And some of us decided not to be part of this climate action, but some of us did go over, and we did some performance work with our children in Paris, and we were just definitely the only ones there at the actual protests with small children. It was highly militarized. So, and again, thinking about the ethics of making work and activism with younger children, was very prescient. And all of the work really is A Place of Their Own. These actions, these performances, films that we now make, now installations, and now how it's kind of morphed as the children get older, that Sam and I work in different ways, which I'll look at some of the current projects where we work with communities and arts organisations and scientists and other people, and to think as a form of co-inquiry, and really again sort of thinking about what artists bring in terms of some of these complex issues of our time. And I think something for me of what art practices can do, and art as a form and its relationship to activism, is that it's the complexity of what we're all living through, and the enmeshed, entangled conditions of borders, climate, colonialism, racial violence, and now COVID, is that and obviously capitalism always is that it gives us some of the tools to be able to work through and to understand, but also to importantly shift some of that, which we'll talk a bit more about imaginary as we as we go through. And I think that Harshawala, who's an amazing, I'm sure people know her work, activist and writer, thinker on borders, and her work on border imperialism has been really important to some of the work and thinking on borders for me and many others. And really kind of talk, and who also writes brilliantly about activism and collective thinking. But she writes that, for me, understanding how violences are connected and really understanding the immensity of the problem was less overwhelming. It motivated me to think in bigger ways, to organise with other people, to understand this is fundamentally about radical, massive collective action. It can't rely on one person or even one place. And I think then those, as our work has, and as we've matured over the last 10 years and what A Place of Their Own does, it's about very much the kind of hyper-local, and whether that's your situated experience as an artist, as Patricia spoke so eloquently about, but how that then relates to others that aren't like you, and other humans, but other non-humans, and places as well, different localities. So where you are and where you move through the world, and how that might connect on a planetary basis, I guess. And I think that's, for me, working through using some art practices, methods and thinking, is able to kind of manage, I guess, or work through that complexity, and also, in a way that is able to hold on different types of knowledges and different types of experiences. So that was the idea, sorry, of responsibility. I mentioned it too soon about responsibility from Donna Haraway. And again, just some other kind of thinkers have been really important. So there's activists as well, have always, again, this idea of thinking. And one of the things Sam and I keep coming back to in our lives, we see so enmeshed within all these things that we talk about, capitalism and how do we live outside, with it, how live with outside, but also challenge the structures that feel so, that we're all trying to rail against, while actually still, for us, still going to work and still doing this. And we have these moments of crises ourselves when we think, well, what point do we say that the collapse between what we do as artists and activists and absolutely how we live our lives, so art and activism isn't something that we do, it's something that we live, and there is a blur for us, but we still feel that if we want to go further, and that's when we come back to this, having children, about how that then shifts how you can and what you can't do, and thinking about how some people are able to practice activism and art in different ways to others. So but as Apatitas have been really inspirational, I guess, and help to sort of do what I think what I'm going to look at now is this. They help to create this, because of how they live, because they still live in this this idea of these autonomous communities whose activism has become their life. Offer us a space in the imagination to think about other worlds, and other worlds being possible, I guess. I think artists do that as well to an extent, they're kind of creating the conditions of other worlds. Okay, so without the background, I will go through because I know we're tight on time. So one of the projects I want to talk about is Ella, and Ella means other in Irish. And this was a really important project for, I'll go to this one first, for me, really, but we do it as a part of A Place of Their Own. And this project is a transdisciplinary visual art and spatial research, another research project. that really suggests alternative imaginaries of borders, so these are the sovereign borders, and we explore the border, specifically border in Ireland, through art practice, site-specific performance, film and installation, and drawing on things like citizen science and critical spatial practice, and it's a really collaborative process, and from which we have developed this idea of border fictioning, which I'll try to unpack a bit, and it engages the human and non-human actors of the border and reclaims the border as this very embodied subjective realm, and as a way to challenge the trap of the dominant sovereign border, and think about how we might think differently about borders while recognizing the very real lived experience violence of borders, which Harshawali talks about. And this thinking of, it was the Chicana writer Gloria Anzaldúa who talks about the borders we don't cross borders, borders cross us, and the place of this kind of performance practice of which for me was a way to disrupt the tyranny of the border. So I take on this persona of Ella, and she's a kind of transmuter, a kind of gorgon. She's a shape-shifting being that travels through space and time on the border, and the basis for this is going to the border. And you know, in this practice we share Woodward and Jones's position that we need new ways of thinking about borders in socio-spatial, but you know, different imaginaries, while still acknowledging, as I say, that the lived experience. So these are some stills from the Territories of Ella film, so one of the films that we've made around, which are very much art films. They're not narrative. They explore different themes of the border. And this is one of the images from some of the rituals I perform on the border, which we then record and take sounds and make into films. And the different places along the border. So I should talk a little bit quickly about the border. Why do this practice? Again, picking up from what Patricia said about why this practice of being on the border. So for me, it's part of a situated knowledge and the embodiedness of the border. So I'm white, but and I'm white. I'm an Irish woman from a small border town there in the left, Ballyshannon, which is on the which is in the Republic of Ireland. And my father's Catholic and my mother's Protestant, and I grew up in the Troubles, throughout the Troubles. So, and we moved to England when I was quite small, and then we moved back to Northern Ireland in my teens. So the border has been, and this border has been part of my early life, and later life. I came back to it as an artist to think about what does it mean to be from and of a border, and to have the mixed Catholic Protestant parents, and at the time as well. And the border in Ireland is after British intrusion over many hundreds of years, going back to the Norman invasions. The partition, as we see now, the border in Ireland it's the centenary of the border this year, and it was part of the agreement really to as the Irish were continually uprising against the settler British. The partition happened in 1921, and it was it's supposed to be a temporary borderline, and there was some agreement of where it went, where it fell, but obviously, as we know now, that Northern Ireland is part of United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland is a sovereign state. Okay, so that's just very briefly on why. And this again, like I said, the kind of hyperlocal about the embodied experience becoming really important, but then how that then interacts with wider issues around borders. And so yeah, and Ella does that, and it's long term. So it's been going on. We've been doing that practice since 2016, and we keep going back to the border and making new films. And we have an exhibition in July where we'll be kind of pushing the ideas on further and keeping, so we work between practice and then we write about this idea of border fictioning and thinking about the place of the fictioning and imagination as a way to challenge border thinking. So yes, this is just from Sylvia Winter. So in traumatic times like ours, when reality itself is so distorted as to have become impossible and abnormal, it is the function of all culture partaking of this abnormality to be aware of its own sickness, to be aware of the unreality of inauthenticity of the so-called real, is to reinterpret this reality. To reinterpret this reality is to commit oneself to a constant revolutionary assault against it. And I think this feels important, like some of what we know about what kind of fictioning or myth or the function of those other kind of artistic practices. I'll just play this for 1 second. I guess the other thing to say about the practice as well, like I said before, that it's I think the importance now in the time of climate crisis is like the work that we try and do is, like we said, this co-inquiries with places and spaces and people, but also to think, also think about what about the, like I said before, the non-human actors. So quite often we work with particular thinking of not just animals, but we think about other, you know, what else, who else do we share the planet with, and how else are they impacted by some of these issues and questions that that are affecting, that are more often not human cause, but also they have an impact outside of humans. So it's again just trying to look at the wider issues of justice, I guess. So just to show a couple more projects. So so we this is a project in Sheffield and the Sheffield Rotherham border, and it's again, this is a lot of the work that Place Their Own does. So L is one project, but we work on these ongoing projects with different spaces, and this was again this this phenomena, this condition of fracking, which we were interested in, about local ex-mining communities around Sheffield were coming together and becoming really active against potential fracking sites. And it was this really, so communities who had been, a lot of them had been through the miners' strike and had been from coal mining communities, were now being affected by potential fracking sites. So in this project, we brought together ex-miners and people who are involved in activism to stop fracking sites across these sites on the kind of border sites of Rotherham and Sheffield. And we worked with this, creating some events we met a lot of people and all these different activists to explore how in this post-extraction landscape around Orgreave and Treaton, how the anti-police and anti-governmental activism was happening in these working class communities who had already been ravaged by the Thatcher years. Yeah, this is an image from the 1984 so-called Battle of Orgreave, where as part of the miners' strike, there was the police attacked really the striking miners, and there still hasn't been an inquiry, but this is an image from the day. And so we did this performance on the day and invited people who were involved, activists against fracking activists, and also people who were on the truth as part of the Truth and Justice campaign in Orgreave to try and get this inquiry. That's one of the fracking sites. Again, we continue to involve our children in this. And this is part of the performance walk around the site. And I think there's something, again, about A Place of Their Own. What we do is that the site specificness is really important, because it's kind of the affective trace of whatever's happened in that site, and the interaction with the human and the non-human becomes a really embodied experience for the artist, but also the audience. So this is on the hill, and we just did this whole walk around the site. Oh. And then had a gathering and a talk, and again, this idea, again, picking up what Patricia says about art, this kind of practice has been a way to congregate and assemble and have conversations, and complex conversations. So I know we're going through time, we'll just take a few more minutes to go through these last ones. And this is another project, again, just thinking about the kind of the climate issues that we work with. And this was commissioned by Arts Catalyst, who we worked with for a number of years, called Myths for a Wetlands Imaginary. And this project explores was a way to use the art practice to explore, to think about a resistant wetlands imaginary, as an alternative to carbon and capitalist imaginaries, which kind of completely have, which are infiltrated all of us. And it was a residency in Walthamstow wetlands in London, which is an amazing big wetlands in Waltham Forest. And again, we did some storytelling workshops here with Susan Butler, and we did some digital mapping workshops, and we did some performances and sound work as well, which is Gary Stewart here on the right, who's working with us on a project now in Sheffield. And the question was, it was about bringing together artists, scientists and communities. And we worked with Indigenous artists from the Noongar people in West Perth to think about alternative ways to think about climate change and biodiversity and colonialism, and to use the role of art as a way to produce this kind of counter-imaginary, like I said, with wetlands being one of the most important ecologies and one of the most threatened. So we wanted to create this way, again, to have this conversation about how wetlands have been implicated in capitalism and colonialism, and again with very hyper-local here in Walthamstow, but connecting with wetlands on a planetary basis. I'll just see some of the other images from that work. And this is a performance that we did, which was created these myth fictions of the wetlands from the kind of research we were doing with the scientists and the people who lived in the wetlands. And then we did this interactive site-specific walk, where again we kind of take on these personas of kind of these wetland people, if you like. And then we made a film and have an exhibition to make some films. And this is in Walthamstow. This is I think it's the penultimate slide. So, and one of the things that we've come at, some of the things that we're working on now. So that was in 2019, myths, and Ella's ongoing, but we're now working on some kind of storytelling, storying projects, which I'll just introduce in the last slide. So this is from Haraway again. It matters what matters. We used to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell, to tell other stories with. It matters what knots, not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. And I think these are the two, this is the last slide. So these two current projects that we're working on at the moment. So wetland dwellers, again, we've moved from Walthamstow to Sheffield, Rotherham again, and these kind of terrain vagues, if you like, these places of in between that are a kind of not city or rural, post-industrial landscape again. And this wetland dwellers builds on the work that we did in Walthamstow, and is really kind of looking at the wetlands in these communities on the outskirts of Sheffield, but budding with Rotherham, bringing together communities, but really having a kind of deep understanding of the existing stories of people who live near the wetlands and why they care for them so much, and this kind of, where does that social justice come from? Some of these, like these men here who have been taking the wetlands, marshlands of the area for decades. And this other one here, this again, our work is developed to work with scientists, and this Stories of the Air in Ireland is a project with, this is Macehead Atmospheric Centre in Galway, where we're looking at sharing and creating stories and reimagining the relationship between climate and society, and specifically air pollution in Galway, but again linking this very site specific and local with the kind of planetary conditions of atmospheric drifts, etc. Okay, I said I wouldn't speak for long, didn't I, Maria? So, and I think that's, yeah, I'll leave it there, and yeah, thank you.
Apologies, I've been talking, yes, I was on mute. So Paula, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear about all these projects. I do have some comments and questions for both you and Patricia, but I would like to give the audience and everyone who has been here an opportunity to ask questions first, and then I'll come up later. You know, I would like to finish if possible at 7:30 as agreed. So I'm happy to take some questions. If you could, you might have or not a raise hand facility. If you do not have that, just, you know, just ask your question. You know, it's not a large audience, so I should be able to manage it. Or let me know in the chat box you have a question to ask. Okay, Natalia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia and Paula. It was amazing and inspiring. So I have a question for both of you, which I formulated while listening to Paula. I recently finished my PhD thesis about these forms of art and activism used in Mexico for feminist movements, which have been fundamental getting us rights. And I use the term artivism to analyze certain forms of art. And I was wondering, why didn't you use the term artivism, especially if it comes from an exchange between the Chicana community like Ansaldúa and the Zapatistas who were mentioned? Yeah, thank you.
So maybe Paula and then Patricia. Paula, you're on mute.
Got it. Sorry. So yeah, I guess it's not it is about social change, what I think that I do. And I guess that's where artivism for me sits. And like you said, from Zapatistas and from Aldua, it is, and I guess it could be, and maybe it's maybe for someone else to describe it as artivism, and I'd be, you know, I'm happy for it to sit there. But I definitely don't see myself as, because I work so much with direct activists, and there is something about, and it's not that I think to be an activist you have to give over your whole life to it, and there's many forms of activism which you talk about, the kind of the everyday, you know, the kind of small, the everyday micro acts of activism, which I think are deeply important also. It's whether it's yeah, there is no good answer to why it isn't described by artivism, but I guess it depends where it lands with the audience and in what context, maybe. But it is I guess it is a form of artivism because it is intentionally about social change, but it's not explicitly trying to push social change from one to another. So it's more, it's so, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what you said, Natalia, about whether from your research, whether, you know, it's not that I feel that it's restrictive or anything either way. It's just, I just know that it sits somewhere around, it's art activism, it's spatial, artistic, and it just feels that the practice is constantly evolving as well, and which I think is something that I'm very aware of, you know, given my experience and life stages and stuff. I don't know, I do, yeah. So no particular reason why not, but I can see how it is a form of artivism.
Patricia, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, it's not a term through my research that I'm overly familiar with. So my research is looking at, the focus really is on voice and dissenting women as opposed to activism. So the women, I suppose my approach is that the women were dissenting, they were challenging, but not that they were activists. So I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't suggest that they weren't activists. I suppose my focus really is on voice and the positioning of the women and the muting of their voices. So I think that's the focus there. In the art of oppression, I can see where actually, you know, that would probably have some value in terms of that film. But I think because it's not an area that I'm really that familiar with. But now that you've pointed it out, I'll certainly be doing some research into it, because I can see where it has resonance, actually. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So I can see Rekha as a question, but there is also a question in the chat box for Patricia. So do you want to take that question for you in the chat box, Patricia? And then I'll take Rekha's question.
Okay, so are you reading it out, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can read it out. So, hi, Patricia. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I would like to ask, have the three women artists ever met? When making the film, have you thought about including the three of them discussing together about their experiences and work? And where was the film screened and what were the reactions? Thank you.
Okay, so hi, so who's that from? That's from?
It's from Julia.
Julia. Hi, Julia, thanks for your question. No, they hadn't met. So the first time, they didn't even meet at the premiere because it was during lockdown, so we were online. So there hasn't actually been an opportunity for the three of them to meet, although two of them met by pure accident, I think about a month ago. So no, they hadn't met, but as I said, it took me about 3 years to make. So I met Ivana first, and I was then looking for the other two women, and I knew that the art needed to be different and that the women needed to be diverse as well, so different in that respect as well. So yeah, it took a long while to find them and to find the separate stories. So because I knew that there was, you know, that their experiences clearly would be very different, but I also knew that there would be very a lot of similarities. So no, they hadn't met. Have I answered all the questions? Have I answered it all?
Possibly, yes. There were quite direct questions, you could answer them one by one. Thank you, Patricia. I will take now Rekha's question.
Yep, thank you. Yes, it's just a question for actually both of you. Thank you very much for your presentations. They were really, really insightful. And I was just, something I'm really thinking about these days within arts and activism is the role of anger, if at all there is a role for it. And I'm just interested in your opinions on that.
So maybe, shall we start with Patricia? Maybe that's relevant because there was one of the artists was talking a lot about anger. So maybe you have something to say about that.
Okay. I think certainly there is a role, and I think that can act as the motivating element of creating art. Certainly the three women that I interviewed have an element of anger in them. So Ivana clearly is still very angry. She basically says that she's from a country that no longer exists. So, and if she asks someone who's a teenager, if they've heard of Yugoslavia, they will say no. But this is her homeland. So there, the anger that's for her, that the politicians and governments have created this position for her where she no longer feels that she belongs. So there is a great amount of anger in her, and that comes out through her range of art, basically. Similarly, with Fazana, what motivated her piece was, this idea that she's the bright Asian lady and that there are other Asian lady and not all of them are bright. And so for her, it's that perception of her and her culture and her as a woman and so on. And in the film, she says, I've been a housewife, I've been a mother, I've been to work, I've had all these roles, but the bottom line is, I am who I am. And with Honey, she's angry. She was saying, I'm not angry, but in the film, you'll see that there are elements where she says she's tired, and she talks about the racism and misogynoir and so on. And I really do feel that, which I thought was interesting, because Paula started her piece saying what are our responsibilities as artists, and my first thought was, do we have a responsibility? As artists, do we have to do our ideas, our feelings, should we be spokespeople, I suppose? I feel that that is what I want to do with my work, without a doubt. So for me, I don't know if it's a responsibility, but I certainly feel that I need to, this real need to get, or try to get people to understand, to try to change often the dominant narrative. So Paula talked about, this whole, the colonialism, just trying to fight through and to encourage people to perceive things, to revision, to just think about things in a different way. So I can't remember your question, but I hope I've answered it.
Thank you, Patricia. Paula, anger.
I can be brief. Are you even an artist if you're not angry or a woman? Oh man, yeah, definitely. Like, I think anger is really important. But I also think, but so is joy and all the other emotions. But yeah, anger has an important role to play in because it is a fight, it is a fight, and it is a struggle, and where the anger, but I also know, there is place for anger in I think, short answer.
Well, I was going to say something, but I'm just aware of time, and there's a very interesting and important question in the chat box, and I'll take that question and I'll put it to you. Well, it's addressed to the three of us, but you are the speakers. I'm happy if there is time to say something about it, because it's also relevant to myself as an academic, but I'll read out the question. So, hello, Patricia, Paula, and Maria. I love the topics that have been discussed here. I would just like to ask about the interactions between activism in academic and art spaces and engaging with popular art and dominant culture. I'm curious primarily how to inspire and get working class people or people without access to higher education or children involved. I'm really interested in how to make topics like this even more public and accessible. Thank you. So I think this is a really important question. Paula, maybe I think you'll be a good one to start with this one.
Yeah, I get so. Yeah, it's really, really important, and I think it's. I really passionately feel that I'm not because of my education, etc., and the life that I have now. I came from a working class background and didn't have access to art at all. So I feel really passionately about the access and how I work in contemporary art spaces as well as communities. And there is, it is. I don't think there's a very simple answer to this, but again, it goes back to that response, the responsibility, and why I like how Harrow framed it, it's response and ability. It's a response to what's going on and your ability to be able to respond. And I think in the position that I have, I have an ability to respond to issues like this. So yeah, some people have mentioned before in the talks and the discussion about intersectionality and classes in terms of art and activism is hugely important. I think it's just working hard as artists to think about what the different spaces and where art happens is really important, and where culture happens and who defines what that is, and what the barriers to culture and to contemporary art spaces are, which are many that we know of. And actually this idea, I think, which I'm trying to do in the practice, certainly the ones that I'm working with now, these co-inquiries in wetlands and spaces, they are in and with working class communities. And to understand that activism already happening in those spaces, obviously, and art is already happening in working class communities. So it is about working with different communities so yes, how to inspire working. Like I said, there's so many. There are so many people. There's so much art and culture already in working class spaces, but obviously, but there's so much that galleries and cultural spaces can do that they are not doing. Them being right in the centre, and we know that the gatekeepers to those institutions are most still mean that they're not spaces that are welcoming. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's working with communities, and long-term work I think is really important, and spending time like you would as a researcher or artist or just any community worker. You spend time listening to people's stories and what's important to them, and think about what the exchange is. What do you bring? What can your practice and your knowledge and your skills, and what that exchange is, and continue to come back to the ethics of that as well. And the locatedness, be aware of your own located body and all those things. There's so much in there. Maria and Patricia, I'm sure add, but it's a complex, ongoing issue that I think we all differently grapple with.
Well, I would like to give Patricia the opportunity to respond. I'll just say a couple of things. So, from my point of view, as someone who's an academic and who is not an artist but works with artists, so let's say that, I would just like to say that I think possibly the way forward is to do exactly the kind of work that Paula is doing, working with scientists, researchers, communities, and develop new kinds of collaborations. Obviously, when you think about universities and academia, or when you're thinking about museums and galleries, there are dynamics, power dynamics that need to be destroyed and undermined and called out. And that's very difficult. You know, I sometimes want to do work within the university context and find myself in situations which I find difficult. And I don't understand why the institution and why certain people don't see that, you know, don't see that these power dynamics and inequalities are impacting on people. And this has to do with funding decisions as well. So I think universities and arts galleries and museums, you know, they are open to change, but there are dynamics that they are not aware of. And we need to have more conversations about that, even though there is a lot of research that now falls maybe in the last 20 years in the so-called trend of socially engaged art. There are still challenges, and it's important that we have continue to have these conversations and develop new forms of collaboration, like the kind of work Paula and some are doing, but also Patricia. So although Patricia works, you know, it's in a different way, it's a different kind of work, but it's a very difficult question to answer, but it's a question that needs to be asked over and over again, so we don't forget how important that is. So Patricia, so that's my contribution.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lovely question, and I have to say that was when I was putting the funding bid together to the Arts Council, that was exactly what another motivation for me. How do I widen the engagement with this? How do I get to those communities who perhaps don't consider art might appeal to them or engage them? And so as part of the project, it was actually to go into communities and to work with community groups, you know, to encourage them to come along, to engage with the film and to express their ideas through art. So that's what, so I absolutely agree in terms of working with communities. And the other thing though, is that for me, this whole thing about getting communities involved seems to be a question that can't be cracked, because, you know, when we think about museums and galleries, these are boxes, these are spaces that exist within urban sort of environments, and people are not going through those doors. Some people are, but the majority aren't, and it's a case of, so clearly for me, that model isn't working. You know, you need to go out. It's a bit like, you know, this whole idea of hard to reach people. The people are there, they're not hard to reach. It's just having to try to make an effort to meet them on their site, as opposed to tell them to come to your house, if you see what I mean. So I think it's a harder way to get to the masses, but I actually do think it is going into communities and working with communities in that sense.
Thank you, Patricia. So it's 7:32. There is a comment here from William and also one from Natalia. So I'll just give people the opportunity to read the comments. I'm not going to take more questions because, you know, I thank all the audience for being with us all this time, but maybe we just can read out the comments and then I'll just close the session. So there's a comment here from William. And yes, I can understand how you feel. Yeah, the university is still very much an ivory tower, despite its, you know, there's all this impact research agenda, but there's a lot to learn. And there's something from Natalia, who's a Latina in London. Okay. Oh, okay, she's just suggesting something for William to check out. Okay, so I was delighted to have you here. Thank you. I know Paula personally, so it was wonderful to hear about your project. It's brilliant. We definitely need to talk more about it. That's been wonderful catch up. Patricia, I wasn't aware of your work, but I am now. That was wonderful. And you know, a lot of my research is actually on voice, so we also would have a lot to talk about.
Oh.
Yes. So that was fascinating to hear about your work. I was really pleased that, yes, when we were deciding about the speakers to have you. It's a shame Ruth has not been able to be here. Yeah. She would have been wonderful. But that's what it is. I have to say that I am planning a kind of follow-up event at the Bauman Institute at the University of Leeds. So hopefully we can reach out to you all as an audience that will pick up on some of these themes, which will be, co-hosted with the festival with Ambrose. Ambrose, are you there? Do you want to say hello to everyone? I know you're there in the background, but Ambrose is the heart and soul of the festival. So if you want to say something just before I close.
Just to say thank you.
No,
all.
We want to see your
Okay.
If you could put your camera on.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Ambrose.
Yeah.
He's the founder of this grassroots festival, and he's the heart and soul of the festival, and keeps us going and enthusiastic and inspired, having these important conversations no matter what.
Yeah. So just to say thank you all very much for attending, and also thank you to our speakers for the presentations. The Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival is now in its 8th consecutive year. We run each year from the 4th of December until the 10th, and every year on the 10th we focus on a different human rights issue. This year our focus is going to be on whether it's time for Britain to legalize cannabis. As we know, around the world, many countries are currently doing the same. And in the UK, there are very serious questions around how cannabis is racialized, how prosecutions are also racialized. And there's the whole question around whether as a country and as communities, there's more benefit in legalization and taxation rather than prosecution and criminalization. So that event is taking place tomorrow. You are more than welcome to join us. And back to you, Maria, Patricia, and Paula. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm just going to close this session. Thank you very much all for being with us and for your very insightful questions, William, Julia, Natalia, Hecke, and others. And I hope to see you all possibly in another similar event. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Paula.
Bye.
Bye, Patricia.